This is a One More Mosh Pit production.
The Donner Party was the first thing I covered on Horrible History Abridged. Even when I was writing it, I was taking chunks of shit out of it because I'm way too verbose, but I had an enthusiasm about it. I didn't take out the story points, the plot points, but I made it more cut and dry, more for the standard format of Horrible History Abridged we do now, where we present the information and just kind of riff on it. I had the snark turned up to an 11 on that. I mean, it was at capacity for...
That's true. But you were doing it solo. You had to pick up all the slack of going back and forth and kind of spitballing off of each other and all the banter and stuff like that. So you had to add in every thought that you had that you thought was funny and all of the jokes that you wanted to make them, but you had to add a lot more stuff than... Yeah, and you did really awesome. If you guys haven't listened to that, obviously you're listening to this one, but...
Want to lower your expectations on production value. It was during the pre-editing days of this podcast when I would literally hit stop after a recording, save, and begin uploading it. Once again, this is Horrible History Abridged. I am Zach Matthews, the host and owner and operator of One More Mosh Pit Productions.
That's right.
You know, you can just make up like a company.
Yeah, I'm Stephanie.
Stephanie and I were talking about this earlier, and you said like something 100 years in the past or more is real to us as like fiction is.
Yeah, it seems less real. It's like a movie or a book you're reading, and I think that's a pretty common thing for people. You can listen to stories about things that happened 100 years ago that are absolutely horrible and atrocious, but it doesn't seem as real.
Practically Star Wars to us. Yeah. Only you can't tangibly hold Anakin Skywalker's helmet or lightsaber, and you can't actually go to the places that were. It happened in a frame of existence that we're not part of, I guess.
Yeah. Plus, a lot of shit that happened back then was so horrible. Not specifically the Donner Party, but just in that time. Oh yeah, of course it was horrible.
And that's another thing when people talk about, what would you do with the time machine? I just think about implications of going back in remote times in history and just how like unimaginably and mundanely horrible the quality of life was back there compared to what we have now.
Just
and everybody was just caked with shit the whole time.
Normal. Yeah, but a lot of people like me probably know about the Donner Party, know about this story in a very vague sense. A group of people was trying to go west and they got stranded and they had to resort to cannibalism. That's probably the extent of most people's knowledge, but what happened, like the series of events that went along with it, are so insane. Right. I mean, that's the whole draw of true crime, everything, of phenomena. You can say to somebody, oh, who's your favorite serial killer? And that's not really a terminology that I would use, but I've heard it a lot. It's not saying, oh, I admire this or I am glad this happened. It's just like, this is the most fascinating that I've heard about. This is the most interesting, and even those words feel kind of wrong to use, interesting and fascinating, but it's true. Being
weird at a very early age, a lot of us, I'm sure a lot of you listening went through that stages, but I went through it so early and so hardcore that like I didn't not only had to accept that like I was weird, but like I had no control over it whatsoever. Yeah. Mental illness didn't help. No control turns into not giving a fuck, and you could just be as weird as you want to. And I was the kid in middle school and high school that was writing term papers about serial killers and massacres and stuff like that. I was a wonderful student back then, but I was also going to the counselor for some vague thing that nobody would explain to me, and it was over some subject matter I was writing on. The 90s Addams Family movie where like their friend at camp with the glasses, the Jewish kid, he has like serial killer collector cards, and one's the Black Widow that's married to Fester. I would have been that fucking kid.
Yeah.
It was back before it was cool, folks. I was watching horror movies and stuff. This is real American history, and this is like, God damn, this really happened.
Yeah.
I didn't like get a half chub over it or anything like that. I wanted to express. It's not a kink thing. I love my violence and sex very intense and very separate. The story didn't need any treatment on my part whatsoever because it's a good enough story on its own. I can't approach any subject matter from 100% serious.
Well, I think that's what also makes it more palatable. I don't mean that to sound disrespectful for the victims, but
that was the exact word I was going to use. But go ahead.
But yeah, that's also how we cope with stuff. We laugh at stuff that's real fucked up. What else are you going to do?
Whenever you got people laughing and joking around and off their guard, you can actually point out and go, you know, this stupid, fucked up, like absurd thing that's happening right here, this is still happening. And you can cite certain examples of like how we have not learned from history.
Do not just be plagued with nightmares of the horrors of it. There are plenty of things that we can't touch. We can't cut. There's no way to make them funny.
Oh, we're going to test that. And it's fun to look back at other points where we were an absolute shit show too. Here we go, jumping into the story. America in the 1840s was lousy with economic depression, malaria, and typhus. But for those in the middle and eastern parts of the country, there were promises of a better life in California and Oregon. I'm going to talk about a fellow here named Lansford Hastings, because he's very important to the story. He's not the hero.
There are no heroes.
There's no heroes. There's one guy I'm going to put there because he does a full hero's arc.
At literally the very end, like, rescue group, or maybe the only heroes. Spoiler alert, there have to be rescue parties.
They have to be rescued, what's left.
Yeah.
Okay, Lansford Hastings was an Ohio-born lawyer. But more importantly, he was an adventurer and a writer. He basically wrote travel guides for immigrating settlers. He spearheaded immigration to Oklahoma, and he touted it as a paradise, and a lot of people moved there. And this was the catalyst that started the oversettling and overfarming of Oklahoma that begat the disastrous Dust Bowl. So this guy's got his fingers in a lot of pies, historically, like a malevolent Forrest Gump, if you will.
He had a big life.
Hoping to basically take his throne as the king of the Republic of California, he penned The Immigrant's Guide to Oregon and California. This guide was likely to be found on the wagon manifest or within the saddlebag of dead pioneers. Hastings propagated California as a promised land. His real plans were to essentially flood California with whites and crowd out the Mexicans in a bloodless revolution and crown himself Emperor of the West. He would start migration west before the gold rush, and this resulted in what they called the Overland Exodus of 1846.
Right, so right off the bat, wannabe politician who, trying to stick his finger in pies that he doesn't even have any idea about.
He's diversifying like any guy with too much money and too much self-esteem.
Yeah. He would be rich and he would like build a rocket to go to space or something.
And he would be
he...
even more obviously terrible because of social media and news coverage. Hastings' big selling point was his Hastings Cutoff. The cutoff was a supposed shortcut from the tried and true Oregon-California trail. Hastings claimed that this shortcut would shave nearly 400 miles off of the trail. According to the direction, one would leave the main California trail at Fort Bridger and travel southwest around the Great Salt Lake. And that sounded like a hell of a deal for like all these large wagon trains. And the wagon trains weren't just like frontiersmen and Jeremiah Johnson and these motherfuckers.
It was families, old people and young people and
the families hired help and bachelors and journeymen and just guys
animals.
That just gig workers and day labor type people. Somebody was just getting work.
Well, thank goodness that Hastings created this shortcut.
Right, because why wouldn't you take a shortcut?
Yeah, 400 miles, that's a big deal.
Hastings formulated the directions for a shortcut based on a little more than speculation over a map. So
it's like he just got a map and he was like, why are these people taking so long to get there? Look, if I put this ruler here, point A, point B, done. Look how easy this trip can be. And then he published it. Well,
he had traversed a tiny fraction of the actual cutoff, but he did so in very mild weather, and he had a very small crew of like hardy, apt, hired men, like dudes that had been there.
Yeah, mountain men that knew how to travel and survive in this kind of terrain.
And they had the survival abilities, and they did this under no time constraints.
Right.
So it was just a dry run where they were like, yeah, we did most of it. We know. You know.
Yeah, this is fine. We came this far. So, like, we went 50 miles. I'm sure the other 350 is the same. It's totally fine.
So the experience he based these directions on was limited at the very best, and a massive oversight concerning the perils and hardships a wagon train of pioneers with old folks and kids would face. because there are only small vague references to the route around Salt Lake made in Hastings' guide. I don't think blame should lie entirely on him.
Nah.
I'm not one of these people that like absolve him completely, because there are people like that.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe it shouldn't be entirely on him, but come on, if you're going to publish this shit, you need to at least go the distance and travel the whole trail before you say, this is good, go here.
And this is a point of contention to historians and stuff like that, with all stories of like people that we've never observed and stuff like that. Like, it goes back to what you were saying about it being so foreign. This could be people arguing over the virtues of Queen Cersei on Game of Thrones.
Right.
I think I have more insight to like who Cersei is as a person than I do Lansford Hastings, but I'm still going to call him a cocksucker.
Well, I mean, he had aspirations of
being
you'll
see
politician
later.
And being so awesome, so I don't like him anyway. But you're right. It could be he was trying to do something good for people, or it could be he just wanted to make money and a name for himself.
Other things we can point to concerning his complicity and all this, Hastings' guide was practically the Bible for the Donner leadership there at the beginning. The road out west, it was perilous as hell. Again, you played the Oregon Trail. It was, for the most part, a very survivable experience. So it's estimated among previous trip accounts that the loss of human life on the trail was about 4%.
Okay.
Now, that's high. That's a lot of people.
I mean,
I'm
relatively.
not going to sit here and be like, no, nobody died. I'm not going to talk about COVID. Like, no, not a big deal. I'm still here. Not a big deal at all. 5 out of 6 people agreed that, like, Russian roulette is fucking harmless. Of that 4%, what category do you think they fell into?
Probably wasn't the healthy, hardy young men, or
it wasn't
or
Rooster Cogburn and all these guys out there. It was the children.
Of course.
And I imagine it's padded out with elderly that decided.
Right.
Which that I'm going to get on a point later with that. The parents, taken to task by responsibilities on the trail, were unable to give their undivided attention to their children, resulting in juvenile casualties aplenty. And here I'm going to throw out a highlight reel of ways for children to die in like wagon trains, falling under wagon wheels.
Okay. All right. Nope. No backup camera or anything. That's
disappeared into tall grass, never seen again.
Okay. A little weird, but
abducted by Native American tribes.
Okay.
Drowning was so common that mothers sewed their children's names into their clothes for identification purposes later when they found their bloated corpse downstream.
Why were these children not tethered to something?
Because they would probably ended up hanging themselves with it. Rattlesnake bites.
Okay.
Lightning strikes.
Wow, that is... I can't believe that made it to the highlight reel. That's disturbing.
Trampled by livestock.
No, I can believe that one.
Pummeled in hailstorms.
Again, how frequent were these hailstorms to kill?
Yeah, that seems like...
God damn, that's
that's
some serious.
For them to mention that it was hailing enough to like off 1 or 2 children. Shot by frequent accidental discharging of guns carried by their fathers.
Right. Accidental is in quotes.
Yeah. How many times do you walk behind a little kid and they stumble, or they give you a flat tire when you've been walking that before you like, oh, I could just like close my eyes and let this finger slip and I wouldn't have to worry about this for another 500 miles on foot. Measles.
Okay.
You knew it was there. Diphtheria.
Yeah.
Whooping cough.
Okay.
Influenza.
Yes.
Tuberculosis.
Ah, yes.
Typhoid fever. Malaria. Mumps. Smallpox. Food poisoning. Infected cuts.
Okay.
And I want to know the severity of the infected cuts. You know, the old hack premise where like somebody's like, oh, I got a splinter, I'm gonna fucking die.
Yeah, I mean,
I've got diarrhea, that's it for me.
It's not like you could keep anything clean out there on the trail, so.
At what point are you observing the deed for your land, and as you take it out of the envelope, you errantly slide it across your thumb, giving yourself a paper cut? Do you immediately write in your last will and testament?
You probably should have.
How severe did this cut have to be? I'm exaggerating, but something like that could get way out of hand in the Northwest. It's a joke premise because it was very much a real thing. Pioneers helped others when it was feasible, but priority was very me and mine, and this was out of sheer necessity.
Yeah, it had to be. You couldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, unless you were literally a single adult male or something, what are you going to do to help people? You're barely surviving on your own.
If the patriarch of a family died and his wagon basically stopped moving, oftentimes the wife and children couldn't keep up with the flow of regular wagon traffic, so they were left on the wayside there, where hopefully good Samaritans on the next wagon train would pick them up and take them with them. And most of the abandoned bereaved were virtually never seen again.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, maybe you could just slide them right into the casualty figures, because we won't hear their stories, but I imagine they were pretty terrible too.
Probably.
The journey began in Independence, Missouri in 1846. George and Jacob Donner and James Reed and the men's respective families set out for California. While the Donner name will ring out through history and horrific infamy, James Reed is our main guy here, and he should share his proportional blame for the litany of tragedy that awaited, but for all intents and purposes, kind of our main hero.
Yeah.
This is kind of a Pulp Fiction, different stories and stuff that like intersect, but James Reed is at least our Samuel L. Jackson or Bruce Willis in this. So.
Okay, all right.
If I had to stick him somewhere, Jacob Donner is the gimp. As a general rule of like cross-country travel for the time, if you're going to make a trek from California to Missouri, you need to set out no later than April 1st.
Wow.
No later than April Fool's Day.
That puts some shit in perspective of how long it takes these wagon trains to go cross-country.
Some would stall and still be okay if they left before May 1st. If people dilly-dallied for a month, they're still probably going to be okay, but they're pressing their fucking luck.
But this rule of thumb is set kind of the whole leaving by April 1st. That's set when you're thinking about the original trail of how that's 400 miles longer than this new amazing, great, super awesome shortcut.
Yeah. You wait a month, come on, stop fucking around, come on, we gotta go. When you're telling the kids to find their fucking shoes so you can get out the door.
We're gonna be late.
The Reed and Donner set, when they set out, a whole 2 weeks into May. And this would prove to be their first grave and critical error of many. Checkmark number 1 in the fuck-up category if you're keeping some kind of score at home. The trip was supposed to take 4 months and cover around 2,500 miles of wild America.
Right.
And 2,500 miles is like from here to Portland.
Yeah.
If you've done any kind of travel or something like that, for me, it's roughly from here to Portland, because if I took out from Little Rock or Memphis, I could drive to Portland and drive back and get 5,000 miles as a FedEx ground over the road team driver.
Right.
And that's a goddamn long trip.
Yeah, in a truck. In a vehicle. It doesn't take 4 months.
Yeah.
You don't leave
on foot
in May and get there in September.
On foot, if I knew I had to walk from Memphis to Portland, every kind of weather that's bad you meet on that trip.
Yeah. Once you get up there into the mountains, it's winter real early. It's not like Arkansas.
That trip is fucking beautiful also. I can appreciate how beautiful the scenery is out there and all. Also, it's like the great wilds out there still. Every kind of impressive and intimidating landmark is on that trip. Can't imagine what it was like whenever there wasn't a fucking pilot or flying J fucking 5 miles out up the road to get a fucking tornado and a Mr. Pibb.
I don't know how much is just survival back then, but I can't imagine them just like stopping to admire the scenery. I'm sure they did to a certain extent, but your mind's on a lot of other shit. You can't just enjoy your trip.
I was all cynical and eye-rolling about the beautiful sceneries I saw out there, because I'm like, it ruins it that I'm on the clock right now, So, it's supposed to take 4 months, 2,500 miles through the wilds of America. It largely explored, but still so many variables. And to kind of frame our story, rescue wouldn't come for these people until about a year later.
Wow.
By then, one man's family would remain completely intact. The other man's family would suffer 8 casualties. James Reed was a veteran of the Black Hawk War alongside Abraham Lincoln. James Reed's already a mover and shaker in the country. He had found success, but circumstances necessitated relocation across country and more opportunities. He was hard-headed, and history would not reflect kindly on some of the decisions made as the shadow leader of the Donner Party. So they were trailing a wagon train of somewhere around 500 wagons that were already making westbound progress. The original party that we're talking about fell in with other families, most notably more families in our story: the Graves, the Eddies, the Murphys, Eddie Murphy, the Kesselberg family, and the Breen families. It wasn't just the families along the travelers. There, like I mentioned, there were also also wagon teamsters, servants, cooks, other employees, bachelors, and other solitary travelers. So these people were bringing their whole fucking help staff with them and stuff like that.
Well,
which
you can't just...
is a stark contrast to their quality of life towards the end of the story. Out of the 87 definitive members that we can collectively tabulate of the Donner Party based on all the old documents, of the 87 that we have start the group, 46 would wind up dead before the whole ordeal officially ended with final rescue efforts. Now, when I first heard about this story, I'm like, well, that's almost half. As you'll see, and you'll probably imagine, like, the survivors of this trip, it wasn't just like a fucking clean transition into the land of milk and honey after all this. It wasn't like a clean shit where you wouldn't even have to wipe. Them as a person was broken after this, or the people that heard about it didn't like them.
Right, even the survivors.
There was a stink on you.
Right.
Based on what happened later.
It's like, better change your name. This is, you don't want to be associated with being part of this group.
The frontier was mostly boring and monotonous. People resorted to sex for distraction, as they have for all time existing.
Yeah, it's the oldest distraction.
Not a place you want to have a kid.
No.
When you're transient and nowhere near any resources, it's not good to be pushing children out.
No, I mean, this time really wasn't ideal for having kids anyway, but especially this.
There were birth control efforts.
Oh, okay.
Nothing like we have today or anything like that. They would trade makeshift vaginal sponges to little cum catchers that they just made out of like frontier arts and crafts and just shoved up there.
That, I can't get into that right now.
Because you gotta keep it up there all the time, because you're basically like a free use living hole in which your husband or whoever owns you just pumps inside of you whenever he feels like it. So do you just wear it all the time? Or?
I don't know, but I mean, it's not like it's something that you'd want to carry around anyway, so they probably just kept them up in there.
There were other birth control measures and stuff, herbs and other remedies, and they've had them since Roman times. When a woman was impregnated, you wouldn't know until the quickening, when it's kicking around and making your belly look like alien. Well, I mean, they're on the trail. Like, that child is not going to be very active anyway, because the body is, its very conception was, not likely because of the exhaustion and lack of nutrition that life on the trail would give under normal circumstances. In desperation, sometimes they would vigorously exercise further to elicit a miscarriage. A pregnancy under these circumstances was on a house of cards anyway.
Yeah, desperate times call for desperate measures. So these women were doing what they could to try not to die and not have another...
Yeah, because you'd rather miscarry than carry this child to term and watch it perish.
It was 50-50. Either the mom was going to die giving birth anyway, and the baby was going to die or not die, and then the father would have to, or what you can imagine.
Well, other times, for those more stubborn fetuses, a woman would commission the assistance of a strong man to basically manhandle her and like shake her around real hard to make her miscarry, which is roughness.
Yeah, I mean...
You could come in just like Mike Tyson and work the body. Sweep the leg, Johnny.
Just put a bullseye right there on the belly button.
See that, the plot of an old Abbott and Costello or something like that. Big pregnant woman with a big cartoonish target on her stomach. Maybe stop a cannonball or something. Some folks were natural entertainers and performed to the delight of others in the wagon train. Jay Fosdick was a fiddler. John Snyder was just a silly guy. He was a teamster under the employ of the Graves family, and he was a popular party member because he would just act out and he would do a silly, wacky wagon dance to the amusement mini at like the stopping points throughout travel. Both well liked for what they provided, and they gave people an escape and just anything. In Sorts No Exit, it says, "Hell is other people." Well, the members of the Donner Party would tend to agree. Tired from the trip, familiarity was breeding a lot of contempt and eagerness to reach the destination and separate entirely from everybody else. Everybody became very impatient.
Not everyone is cut out for like the commune life where you just are with other families and other people all the time. Plus, you're dealing with all the hardships already. You don't want to have to deal with other people's bullshit. You didn't choose these people to be in your life.
It's hard enough going to work with some people every day or going in public and seeing people every day. It's even harder when, like, after the perceived hardships of your day are done and it's your leisure time, whatever you could call leisure time in this situation, you're also around all these fucking people.
Yeah.
Hastings downplayed the threat of hostile natives in his guide.
Of course he
Now,
did.
remember, we all come over here with our smallpox blankets, and all kinds of germs, sharp edges, and guns, and just laid waste to a lot of things, either purposely or inadvertently. So, like, he's like, they gotta be mostly died out by now. They gotta be real thinned out.
The ones that are left, they love white people.
Well, natives were anything but sparse, as they'd find. The Pawnees being the first to show up, and they stole cattle and they killed a member of the party. The Pawnee youth would just make sport of robbing the party.
Well, I mean,
Just whatever they
again,
could
you
pick
got to
off
do
of
what
them.
you can do to entertain yourself back then. They didn't have video games and TVs.
You know, they're like, you're bored, motherfucker. We live out here.
Yeah.
Interaction with different tribes varied. Most were just indifferent to the travelers in passing. Some were kind and helpful when they could be. Some were violent and treacherous.
Right.
But like what all of them seemed to have in common, from accounts, they seemed to sense the danger this crew was in.
Yeah, they knew
Like,
this.
they felt the
travelers
impending doom
were in way over their heads.
that just hung around
Yeah.
them. The group would encounter someone from James Reed's past. A few horsemen rode up to the group, and Reed saw a familiar face among them. James Clyman was a renowned explorer and mountain man, and he was Reed's buddy from the Black Hawk War. Clyman, visibly beaten and dirty by his adventuring, had just come from taking the Hastings Cutoff. In fact, he had traveled the cutoff with Hastings on Hastings' first taking of the patented shortcut.
Okay.
So you're riding up to take this famous shortcut somebody's touting as the greatest thing,
Right.
and you come upon somebody that's coming back from taking the trip with the guy
Yeah.
for his first fucking
Yeah,
taking
this
it.
just happened.
And when Klyman looked upon Reed and the litany of vulnerable families he had in tow, now knowing that he planned to traverse the same hellscape he had just gone through barely with all his skills,
Right. And without wagons and babies and old people and animals.
he adamantly warned against taking the cutoff. He's like, man, just take that regular one. It'll take a little bit longer, but trust me.
Yeah.
Well, Klyman described the labyrinth, the canyons made by the Wasatch Mountains, the horrendous heat of the Salt Lake Desert, and the treacherous snow cliffs of the Sierra Nevadas. Well, Reed would ignore the warnings of his old trusty friend, as he would ignore most good advice and bad omens at points of this narrative.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
he's
so, like-
completely making the executive decision that
Yeah.
this isn't anything anyone else in this party needs to know about. I'm not going to listen to him. I'm going to keep doing.
Yeah, I mean, he's stubborn, and he's like most Americans today. They've doubled down and adopted a belief so hardcore that like becomes almost part of them as
Right.
a part of their identity as a human being, and it's insulting to them for them to even touch the notion that they were wrong.
Right, yeah. They see all of this evidence, and it just makes them even more adamant. No, I know what I'm talking about. I saw this guide, and we're going to do it my way.
There's a lot of people you can debate, and any hardcore evidence against their position you present only radicalizes them further.
Yeah, especially somebody as proud as him.
So now Hastings has actually been on the trip. He's realizing some things. He's making some revelations here that it would be nearly impossible for like a standard wagon train to make it through this shit. Like, wow, I really overlooked topographical shit that was on the map. It was just flat when I was feeling of it.
Crazy, right? Yeah, God, can you imagine how he felt? Like, ooh, maybe I shouldn't have put that out there prematurely, literally publishing it before I ever made the full trip.
Also, like, Hastings commissioned like a bunch of able-bodied, known frontiermen and scouts to help the travelers make it through. Like if you Google Mountain Man, Klyman's name is going to be on towards the top of one of those lists of actual non-fiction mountain men that are famous.
He knew what was up. He knew what he was doing.
Because he was writing books back then. People in general were writing a lot more and better. I mean, read some of just the journal entries of like people back then. Everybody was a fucking poet.
And their handwriting was
even
so
barely literate
nice.
people, and their handwriting was gorgeous.
They didn't have TV.
Everyone learned calligraphy.
It was beautiful.
Think of that's just because how the fucking pens worked back then.
Yeah.
And you gotta keep writing because this thing's pouring fucking ink. We have not perfected this technology yet. So he had a lot of help.
Yeah.
Okay. He sent out a scout to hand out this letter. He sent back explaining he would wait at Fort Bridger. Like, so there's supposed to be an intercept for like on the trail for other people coming that way. So he sent out the scout with this letter, and said he'd wait at Fort Bridger with an escort crew because he was already starting some PR and damage control here because he realized he'd fucked up pretty badly. He knew it.
I gotta keep an eye out for
and he
these
was
folks.
trying to like cover his ass. He said he'd stay there, and like when everybody else showed up, him and his escort crew, power numbers, and they'd all make this factored in with James Reed's decision further on the
shortcut,
on what they'd set out to do. The traditional trail would get them there by September, but that early arrival was still too tempting for everybody who was tired of the other people on the trail and all that shit, and just ready to get some kind of stopping point and creature comforts of the old.
How many days would it take to go 350 miles? You know?
Oh, I don't know. I have no fucking frame of reference.
Yeah, and but that's my point. Like, it would have taken weeks.
Yeah. I don't want to walk from here to the kitchen right now. I often sit here about to piss my pants because I don't want to walk to the bathroom. Well, there would be one dissenter, and that would be George Donner's wife, Tamsin. And Tamsin is a female version of Thomas, I think, from back then.
Interesting.
Tamsin.
Yeah, I've never heard that name.
She thought Reed should heed Kleiman's warning and follow the beaten path. While most of the people wised up and took a crucial right at the Y, our fateful party took a right towards Fort Bridger. And you could imagine how much weight Tamsin Donner's word carried as a woman in the 1800s.
Yeah, exactly. She's probably hysterical or something.
July was more than halfway over at this point.
So it's the 87 people that are going with Reed and Donner, and the rest of them that were already there before, they decided to go ahead and go the traditional old route,
this is with Reed and Donner and the other families I mentioned as our cast of. George Donner would win a popular vote for like a party leader vote they had, but like James Reed was more authoritative, and everyone really knew that like James Reed's making the choice. It was like, it was a very George W. Cheney dynamic. The party, upon reaching Fort Bridger, discovered Hastings and those under his employ had departed. They missed the boat, really put all their eggs in this one basket. Yeah. They left with a larger wagon train just ahead of the party. Those people that probably left when it was a good time. A journalist that had witnessed the path ahead had sent a letter back to Fort Bridger, warning all people there the perils of the trip that he'd seen and how it was fucking terrible. Well, Jim Bridger, who ran the outpost and general store at Fort Bridger, would stand to lose some money if this cutoff fell out of favor. His shit wouldn't be on the way, so he kept that letter to himself.
Wow, what a piece of shit. This is the guy in everybody else is doing shit, and you're like, oh, that guy's the worst. Oh, that guy's the worst. And then this guy who basically killing people.
Yeah. This is our mayor from Jaws.
Yeah, right, yeah, exactly.
2 days into this part of the trip, post Fort Bridger, things would start to get bad. We're on the precipice of the part of the trip where shit gets real bad. Yeah, a 13-year-old boy would suffer an accident. His horse would stumble into a prairie dog hole and throw the boy. The boy landed badly and gruesomely snapped his leg so violently that the bone ripped through and protruded from the flesh of the child's leg. Ew. So riders were sent back to Fort Bridger to get help. At best, the boy could expect to be deformed and crippled. That's it. At best. But like we already covered, a paper cut could lead to a gangrene and you might die. The riders, finding no physicians, of course, returned with a big, hairy, grizzled mountain man that they'd found. He was just a guy that was there, and he was eavesdropping. His qualifications were unknown, but he was eager and had the instruments of amputation.
Yes, okay.
They got ready to amputate the boy's leg, but his parents couldn't bear the sound of his screams and decided against it. The mountain man packed up his meat and bone saws and left $5 richer and visibly crestfallen that he didn't get to saw this boy's leg off.
He was really looking for that's messed up, man. I mean, he was going to help and dragged him all the way out there, and he didn't even get to cut the boy's leg off.
Yeah, he's carrying around all this equipment. Serendipitously, he gets the chance, and then it's taken from him so cruelly.
Are you sure, guys? I mean, I'm already here.
The wagon train would follow the ruts left by the group with which Hastings had departed. They would come upon a note posted by Hastings himself. The note declared that the road ahead was impassable. Unsure of what to do next, they sent a rider ahead who actually found Hastings and his crew. He asked where they should go from there. I guess Hastings did his due diligence as far as a bullshitter does, and he climbed a hill nearby where he could see a limited distance and just kind of pointed in a direction.
Oh my God, just pretty much how he wrote the guide in the first place.
He's really yes-anding this.
This guy didn't know shit about this, so let's go ahead and ask him now.
The suggestion would turn out to be even worse than the previous trail. He just made it worse. The party entered the Wasatch Mountains. The part of the trip was supposed to take a week. It took the party 16 days.
Okay. Yeah.
Doubled it and changed.
Twice as long.
James Reed christened the path Reed's Gap.
Of course he did.
I would deny any involved, even though everybody heard me tell them to do it. I would say, no, I didn't. I would Donald Trump and back my way out of the situation. This dude puts his fucking name on this place.
Yeah, he is.
What an asshole.
He's been chomping at the bit to put his name on anything.
Oh, yeah. And that
Just
goes
the
back to
notoriety.
Trump, too. They would make it through the mountains eventually. The task would entail carrying wagons. Like, imagine you get to a trip in your car and your family has to get out and, like, manually lift the car and move it elsewhere to keep the trip going. Moving oxen. So that would go into moving the car.
Which was probably even harder.
You know, also the livestock that was just in tow. They couldn't make it up there on their own. So you're carrying all the dogs and kids and shit up there. Clearing copious amounts of brush just to move through there just for passage. And moving boulders. It's getting ridiculous and this trip is getting hard.
The first time that motherfucker said, well, we're going to have to pick this wagon up and carry it. Why did they not just say, actually, let's just turn this shit around and go back?
I don't know about most people, but like me and my people, the group of people that I consider family, wouldn't cotton much to this guy and this shit. James Reed would walked off in the woods to go take a shit. Nobody would heard on him again.
Insane how so many people will just latch on to someone who portrays this persona of being the voice of reason and knowing what they're talking about. And it still happens today. People are desperate to listen to somebody.
So I guess we reach a checkpoint. The group would come along another one of Hastings' notes. This one was barely intelligible. It read, 2 days, 2 nights, hard driving, cross desert, reach water. This 2-word sentence format not being perilous enough, what it entailed was bad. How do you go forward? The sign for all intents and purposes says, most of you are going to die after this.
Yeah, like, if you make it, it's going to take 2 days to get to water.
2 days and 2 nights of continual movement.
Yes.
Because over the next hill would be the Great Salt Desert of Utah. The desolate landscape was void of potable water. This leg of the trip was supposed to take 5 days and cover this very hard 40 miles. The party would find a harder 100 miles on their trip that would take 2 weeks to traverse. The oxen and cattle, dehydrated and exhausted, began dropping, and their subservience flew out the fucking window and self-preservation kicked in, and like a lot of the livestock just bolted at the first opportunity to go find water. Wagons would be abandoned, having been stuck fast in gunky mud that would manifest hard to go through. People were completely miserable and fatigued, their skin blistered, their skin cracked and split open. The smell of the group was outrageously bad, as you'd imagine.
I would imagine.
People had dropped a lot of pretense in the hardship, and they were covered in their own stale urine and caked excrement. The women added to the bouquet with the fragrance of stale menstrual blood and yeast infection. A lot of women just free bleeding out there on the trail. The party was on day 68 of their journey. That's where we're at. Day 68.
Day 68. So that's over 2 months. So they should be well over halfway.
The other wagons that took the standard trail had reached the same point in travel in just 37 days. A month faster.
Right.
The route taken did not shave off 350 miles, as they found, but added 125 miles.
And that's just distance. That's not counting how much more treacherous it was. So those same 125 miles took probably twice as long because they were having to clear out brush and leave.
Right, where there was a fucking road.
Instead of
taking the fucking four-wheeler path through the woods, they took the goddamn paved road to the place.
It's like when one of my kids tries to get like to the other side of the table, and instead of going around
That's
where
the
there's
convoluted
nothing,
over
they go
your
around.
lap.
Where they have to crawl under a chair
Between people, over the ceiling fan. Tensions were understandably high.
Yeah, my tension is high right now just hearing about it.
Everyone was hot, exhausted, angry, begrudgingly continuing to travel and live. Existence at that point's got to seem pretty fucking futile and shitty, or at least a raw deal. Well, wagon dancing teamster John Snyder.
Yes, everybody's favorite.
We've established him as a fan favorite. Well, he's at the reins of the Graves family wagon, just barely existing and doing his job. Well, he got tangled up with the teamster of the Reed wagon, of James Reed's family's wagon. Well, incensed by the Now, superfluous labor and lost time that the entangled reins entailed. Everybody's pissed off. Snyder hops off. He's got his whip and he hammer fists it. You know, like when we talked about when we talked about Panzram, and they had their whip had a slapjack in the handle. I guess he did a similar maneuver, and he hammer fisted it into the crowd of James Reed's Teamster. Reed gets pissed. He hops off, isn't fucking around, and he plunges his knife into the neck chest area of John Snyder, fatally wounding him.
Yeah, so John Snyder got off his wagon, hit the guy.
Yeah.
He was like, what the fuck are you doing? And just hit him on the top of the head.
Yeah, John Snyder was acting out.
Yeah. Everybody was pissed off.
But Reed fucking killed him.
Yeah, he just murdered him.
Well, being past the Continental Divide meant there was no established law of the land. A vote would be performed to decide Reed's punishment. Hanging was suggested. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, it was decided that he would be banished from the group with nothing but his horse. This was, in essence, a death sentence.
It could be.
Given the circumstances, but he is James Reed, and he knows a little bit.
Yeah.
He wouldn't leave empty-handed, however, as one of his daughters snuck him some crackers and a couple of guns. Most people are like, he's got meager resources. Crackers and a couple of guns, I could have this country taken over next week. A resourceful person like James Reed, this guy's fine.
Yeah.
If I'm experienced, being well-read and seeing a lot of stories like this, I'm saying this guy's fine.
Yeah.
But for most people, they're like, goddamn, still with that. Mm-hmm. And on this trip, yes, still with that. He's got his work cut out for him. Reed's absence created a leadership vacuum. Just the facade of anything just fell around.
Yeah, they've still got their appointed official, quote unquote, but he wasn't actually making any decisions.
The notion that Donner was actually making any decisions was gone now.
Yeah, they all knew.
The families became even more clannish and isolated. Accounts speak of a Mr. Hardcoop. I felt that I needed to tell this man's story. I know very little about him, but he was an elderly Belgian man who was possibly conscripted as a teamster for the Kesselberg family. Came to the U.S. to see the country. He had a farm in Ohio. He planned to return after seeing California, sell the farm, and return to his native city of Antwerp, Belgium, to spend the evening of his days with his children. And I said evening of his days because that's the words he used.
Yeah, he's old. He's
old
talking about he's in his
Belgian
twilight
immigrant,
years.
and I imagine he still speaks more eloquently than like any Joe Blow.
This is such a weird thought, though, of, his plan was he's going to go to California and check it out, then he's going to go back to Ohio to his farm, then he's going to go to Belgium and the remainder of his years. But like the thought of traveling across country just to see it.
Yeah, see California.
And then go back, and that's wild to me.
He was making money doing this, though.
Yeah, and
this was a gig, but he. Yeah. As icing, he got to see California, but still,
he owned a farm. He took on a job as a teamster. He didn't have to do that.
This farm obviously isn't doing shit. He's just wanting to get. He's going to offload
my
it when he
point
gets
was
back.
He probably could have gone back to Europe, but again, this might have just been strictly to get the funds to go back to Europe.
Well, the wagons had been stripped and emptied to lighten the load for the oxen. Hardcoop began to struggle and lag behind. He was an old guy, at least old for the time.
Right.
Few were sympathetic to his plight as they were exhausted and they couldn't spare any food either. And they were also on foot. Everybody was hoofing it. He kept lagging further behind until he finally comprehended the futility of his efforts. He was last seen sitting down in the Nevada desert beneath a sagebrush. The bottoms of his feet were visibly badly swollen, cracked, and bleeding, and he had accepted his fate. Despite pleas of some of the riders who still had saddle horses to go retrieve the old man, they refused, acknowledging an obvious lost cause. Hardcoop, this old man.
Yeah.
Probably one of the smarter people.
Right.
He saw the fucking writing on the wall.
Yeah. It's unfortunate.
Some riders were tasked with finding escaped cattle and livestock to no avail. They'd return even more tired, frustrated, and near crazed with thirst and hunger. A few recorded accounts vaguely note this thing called Mad Women Camp. Historians from bits and pieces have surmised this as a separate camp set up by angry and fed up wives and mothers.
Well, yeah, that's
plausible.
I don't doubt that.
More natives came to play. Mm-hmm. The Paiutes raided camp. They stole cattle and killed some of the animals with poison arrows just to be fucking dicks. They could just stole them. They could just tell them, no, we're just going to fucking ruin your shit. At night, they would gather around the camps from higher vantage points.
Where they couldn't be seen, but...
Yeah, and they would just ominously laugh. Like they could tell they were fucked. We're still fucking with you.
Could you imagine? These people are fucked up. Like, their minds are already slipping, and they're just surrounded by this laughter.
You rest, it's your only respite the whole fucking day. You're laying down, and like you hear the taunting laughter.
I mean, if I can, whatever energy I had left in my body to climb the highest cliff I saw and just fall off.
Well, desperate times make desperate men, and this will become even more true in this story as it goes on. Less scrupulous settlers, I guess, to put it lightly, would murder others in broad daylight for like goods and valuables, and they would place the blame on the Paiutes. It was an easy scapegoat.
Doing bad shit and then blaming it on...
That's like number 3 on like the American Capitalist Manifest.
That wasn't the first time, and it definitely wasn't the last that...
There's a very famous Lyndon B. Johnson quote. If you can evince the poorest white man, him being poor is to be blamed on like this.
Fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then he won't notice you taking all the money out of his pocket or something. I thought I was going to butcher it, but yeah, scapegoating is.
Well, and to a certain extent, they probably wanted to believe that. I mean, wouldn't you rather believe that it's this external enemy, you know?
Us versus them comes up a lot.
As opposed to someone in your own.
Yeah, like I said, shit would happen broad daylight. You don't want to cut into your fucking sleep time. Rob it. Goddamn, you need the rest. Wagon trains are often misrepresented, like by old westerns, where like they'd circle up and circle the wagons and at a moment's notice, but there would be miles separating a wagon from the next one in line sometimes. Bunching up would occur at the end of the travel day where camp was set up. Still more cloak and dagger you could do on the trail. As mentioned, Native American tribes varied in values, demeanor, propensity to violence, or capacity for diplomacy. A scout sent out would bring back 2 valuable human resources. The scout would introduce Luis and Salvador to Miwok guides. Okay, finally.
Yeah.
So a couple of guys know what they're fucking talking about. They'd be played by Cheech and Chong if this was a movie.
Definitely.
James Reed.
Oh, this motherfucker.
James Reed survived exile.
Of course.
And made it to California. He was oblivious of the well-being of his family or the group at large and had no idea of their losses or the scarcity in food and assets they were facing. This was about the time the annexation of Texas and the Mexican-American War. He joined the fight. His participation would guarantee him some land in California. He knew until this war business was over, he'd be pretty hard-pressed to gather men for any kind of rescue mission for his family. So he's like, let's get this shit out of the way, and then all gains. It's networking for him. Yeah, it's networking, and it's keeping him occupied. The titular Donner Party arrived at Truckee Lake near modern-day Reno, and this was a common stopping point for pioneers before tackling the next day of the trip. Nonetheless, Truckee Lake is not called Truckee Lake anymore. It's called Donner Lake now. We're approaching the last and worst leg of the trip. The most grueling obstacle lay just ahead. The Sierra Nevada mountains. And I think this would be a good stopping point, and I guess we'll pause right there because this next part gets even more heavy, and I've thrown a lot of shit at you. Let's let that digest a little bit before we get into the conclusion.
Yeah, that was pretty wild already, but tune in next time for even more horribler stuff.
I don't remember how many pages of notes I took. The notebook's still in there. I flipped through it the other day, but, probably just a good, what?
I think we're about a third of the way down this journey.
So say like 30-something pages of just scribbling notes and just like short shit that would tell me enough that I could make sentences out of it. We're at like page 7 of all that.
Yeah.
Right now, at this stopping point. Things get wild.
Yeah,
things have been bad, but things get
there's going to be a lot worse
after this. We're going to pause here and take a breather. The Donner Party's going to pause here and take a breather coming into the
We're
winter.
at Truckee Lake now.
So we'll expand on all that and rant and rave and quip on it whenever we get back to the story. We'll see you next time. Come back for the next one, the thrilling conclusion.
That was horrible.
It's history. We'll see you down the road. Take her easy.
See ya.
This has been a One More Mosh Pit production. Available on Spotify, Google, and Apple Podcast and Stitcher, basically wherever you can find quality podcasts. If you liked what you heard here today, spread the word, or go check us out on Facebook. We have a page. You can come and like and follow us and keep up with all our stuff. And you know what? If you didn't like what you heard here today, keep that shit to yourself, huh?